Cave diving is one of the most dangerous activities in the world, but once in a while, a cave diving disaster happens that truly shocks everyone. These are the top 10 cave diving tragedies. At number 10 is the case of Brent Hemphill. This case is particularly tragic because the person involved is a cave diving legend. It was therefore a rude shock to the entire diving community when the news of what happened to Brent Hemphill broke. Brent Hemphill is no ordinary diver. He was a man who was born to explore. As a kid, Brent was not interested in watching TV. He wanted to go out and discover the world. He has been fascinated by caves since he was 14, when he discovered a new section of a dry cave in Indiana. He later moved to Florida and learned scuba diving, which opened up a whole new world of underwater cave exploration for him. Brent would go on to spend more than 25 years diving into some of the deepest and most challenging cave systems in the United States, setting and breaking national records along the way. He also contributed to scientific research and conservation efforts through his nonprofit organization, Karst Underwater Research. This was a man who was known for his high standards of safety and professionalism, as well as his passion and curiosity. He was an inspiration and a mentor to many divers in the international diving community. So how did such an accomplished diver become a victim of his passion? On October 4, 2023, Hemphill embarked on his last dive at Phantom Springs, a cave system in West Texas where he had set the U.S. deep underwater cave record in 2013, reaching a depth of 465 feet and a penetration of 8,000 feet. This is an underwater cave that requires advanced diving skills, specialized equipment, and a scientific permit to access. Only Brent Hemphill has conquered this cave, and to ensure no amateur enters this cave, the entrance to the cave is closed with a barred gate. This cave is formed by a group of sprigs that pour from a cavern at the foot of a limestone bluff. The water is clear and cold, and the cave is filled with various formations, such as stalactites, stalagmites, and columns. It holds the record of being the deepest natural underwater cave system in the United States. However, the cave is still not fully mapped, and there may be deeper and longer passages waiting to be discovered. This was what Brent aimed to uncover on the day of his fateful dive. He was accompanied by his colleague and friend, Andy Pitkin, the director of KUR. The two divers planned to explore a new section of the cave at a depth of 570 feet, but they got separated after Hemphill tied off a guideline on a rock. Hemphill never resurfaced from the cave, and his body was recovered by a team of divers 4 days later. The exact cause of Hemphill's death is still under investigation, but it is suspected that he encountered a technical problem or physiological issue that prevented him from returning to the surface. His death was a tragic loss for the diving community and his family, who remembered him as a loving husband, father, and brother. He was 56 years old. The next tragedy is similar, but with a different twist. Number 9. Shea Axley Tragedy. Just like Brent Hemphill, Shea Axley was a legend in the world of cave diving. He had explored the dark and mysterious depths of underwater caves for almost 3 decades, setting records and standards that few could match. He had written books, taught courses, and inspired generations of divers with his passion and skill. In the course of his explorations, Axley had also faced dangers, challenges, and losses that tested his limits and his spirit. Surely, he knew he was tempting fate, and it was only a matter of time before he paid the ultimate price. Shea was not satisfied with the known caves. He wanted to go deeper, farther, and beyond what anyone had ever done before. He wanted to dive into the world's deepest sinkhole, a freshwater cenote in Mexico called Zacaton. It was a place of mystery where no one knew how deep it went or what lay at the bottom. This was not a new mission for him. Shea had attempted to dive Zacaton twice before, but both times he had failed to reach his goal. The first time, in 1993, he had descended to 925 feet, but had to abort the dive due to equipment problems. The second time, in 1994, he had reached 1,000 feet but had run out of time and gas. He had vowed to return and try again with better planning, preparation, and equipment. After many months spent training, studying, and fine-tuning his dive plan, Shea thought he was finally ready. He had assembled a team of experienced and trusted divers to support him. He had secured the permission and cooperation of the local authorities and landowners. On April 6, 1994, Shea Axley boarded the helicopter with his dive buddy Jim Bowden and flew to Zacaton. They landed near the edge of the sinkhole, a circular opening in the ground about 330 feet across. The water was clear and calm, reflecting the blue sky and the green trees. Shea and Jim unloaded their equipment and set up their dive station. Later, the duo dived into the sinkhole. At 300 feet, they reached the first of their planned decompression stops. They switched to a different gas mixture and waited for a few minutes. They repeated this process at 400 feet, 500 feet, and 600 feet. They were still feeling fine, confident, and excited. The two divers continued their descent, aiming for 1,080 feet, the estimated depth of Zacaton. At 860 feet, something went wrong. Shea felt a sudden jolt in his chest. He looked at his depth gauge and saw it was flashing red. He had exceeded the maximum depth limit of his rebreather, the device that recycled his exhaled gas and added oxygen to it. He had entered a zone where the partial pressure of oxygen was too high, causing oxygen toxicity. This can lead to seizures, convulsions, and death. Shea knew he had to act fast. He reached for his bailout valve, a switch that would bypass his rebreather and deliver pure oxygen from a separate tank. Then he signaled to Jim, who was a few feet below him, that he had a problem and needed to ascend. Jim saw Shea's signal and understood. He also switched to his bailout valve and followed Shea as they began to ascend. They had to be careful not to ascend too fast, or they would risk decompression sickness, also known as the bends. But at 760 feet, Shea had a seizure. He convulsed violently, losing control of his body and his equipment. Unable to hold on to his regulator and the guideline, Shea was in grave danger. He drifted away from Jim, who was powerless to help him. He sank deeper into the abyss, unconscious and dying. Jim saw Shea's seizure and panicked. He tried to reach for him, but it was too late. Then he tried to call for help, but no one could hear him. The thoughts of following Shea crossed his mind, but he knew it was suicide. Jim had to save himself. Shea Axley died on April 6, 1994 at Zacaton while attempting to dive into the world's deepest sinkhole. He was 45 years old. He is remembered as one of the greatest cave divers of all time. While this was indeed sad, it does not come close to the next case. The number 8 disaster is Florida's Manatee Springs Tragedy. Deep under the calm waters of Florida's Manatee Springs Cave, there's a dangerous world. If you're not careful, you can get stuck and never come back. That's what happened to a father and son in this story. Their adventure started simply. They went into the cave at 11:17 a.m., following a guideline. Two sons went with one dad, and the other dad went with another son. Because it was dark, they got confused about their location, so they decided to go back, thinking they had made a mistake. But that choice led to tragedy. The dad with two sons had trouble swimming against the strong current and saw his air running out. Meanwhile, the two sons made it out safely. Now Dad 1 and his son were missing. So was Dad 2. Rescue teams rushed in to find them. They searched around Sioux Sink, but found nothing. Then they found the son's camera and light near Friedman's Sink, about 100 feet away. Sadly, they found his lifeless body not far from there. He had run out of air in both tanks and couldn't make it back. A lot of things went wrong that day. The divers didn't know enough about the cave, and the water was too murky to see well. Strong currents made it hard to swim, and going against them used up more air. They also made some mistakes, like not using a safety line and getting lost. Relying too much on their video lights made it even harder to find their way. 2 lives were lost that day, that of a father and his son. A truly disastrous end to what should have been a day of adventure. Let's move over to an incident that was one of the most famous diving disasters. Number 7. The LDU Tragedy. The LDU Cave Tragedy is a horrifying story of 2 Italian divers who lost their lives in a dark and narrow underwater passage in the Dominican Republic. On February 9, 2024, Carlo Barbieri, 57, and Carlo Basso, 46, decided to explore the LDU Cave, a popular tourist attraction in Cabrera. Mind you, these were experienced divers who had visited the cave before. They planned to dive for about an hour and a half, following a route that would take them through several chambers and tunnels. Everything seemed easy and straightforward. So what went wrong? They entered the water around 10:30 a.m., carrying 2 tanks each and a reel of rope to mark their path. They also had a backup light and a knife. The 2 friends descended into the depths of the cave with caution. They reached the first chamber, where they saw a sign that warned them of the dangers ahead. They ignored the sign and continued their journey. When they reached the second chamber, where they found another sign, they ignored this sign as well and proceeded to the third chamber, where they faced the most challenging part of their dive. A tight squeeze that was only 40 centimeters wide and 15 meters long. Now that is a tight squeeze. They decided to go through the squeeze one by one, with Barbieri leading the way. He attached the rope to a rock and entered the squeeze, pushing himself forward with his hands and feet. He felt the pressure of the rocks on his body, squeezing his chest and stomach. Barbieri tried to stay calm and breathe slowly, but he was running out of air. He reached the end of the squeeze and saw a small opening that led to the fourth chamber. As much as he tried to get through, he could not succeed. At this point, he panicked and tried to back out, but he couldn't. He pulled the rope, hoping that Basso would find him, but he only made it tighter. At this point, he felt his lungs burning and his vision fading. He died of asphyxiation. Meanwhile, Basso was waiting for Barbieri to come out of the squeeze. He saw the rope moving and thought that was Barbieri signaling him to follow. Basso will suffer the same fate as his friend. Their bodies were not recovered until 2 weeks later, after a complex and risky operation by the Dominican Republic's Speleological Society, the DRSS. They were found in a state of decomposition, still attached to the rope. The 2 friends were buried in a local cemetery near the cave that claimed their lives. This is again a lesson that proves even experts can be victims of underwater caves. Number 6. The Plur Cave Disaster. In February 2014, 5 Finnish cave divers embarked on a daring expedition into the Plur Cave in Norway. The team, comprised of Kai, Patrick, Jari, Vesa, and Arid, were experienced divers, confident in their abilities despite the cave's reputation as Europe's largest underwater cave system. They had no idea of the danger they were messing with. As they descended into the cave, things initially went smoothly. However, tragedy struck when one of the divers, Jari, encountered difficulties deep within the cave. Despite Patrick's efforts to assist him, Jari could not make it out. Patrick had to return to the surface without his friend as he was running out of oxygen. Meanwhile, the other members of the team, Kai, Vesa, and Arid, faced their own challenges as they encountered Jari's lifeless body blocking their path. With time running out and their oxygen depleting, they had to make difficult decisions to ensure their own survival. Ultimately, Patrick managed to make it to the surface after 8 grueling hours. The other survivors, Kai, Vesa, and Arid, also emerged from the cave, though shaken by the ordeal. The recovery of the bodies of the deceased divers was a complex and risky operation, undertaken by a team of skilled divers against official orders. Despite the risks, they succeeded in retrieving the bodies, bringing closure to the tragic event. Despite the tragedy, the surviving friends vowed to continue diving. Number 5. The Ricard and Denisio Tragedy. Ricard and Denisio were two experienced cave divers who loved exploring the underwater mysteries of the world. They had heard of a cave system in Spain called Cova dels Arquets, which was rumored to have a hidden chamber with a crack that let in sunlight. They decided to embark on a daring expedition to find and enter this chamber, despite the risks and challenges involved. It would have been better if they did not. What happened next is heart-wrenching. They arrived at the cave entrance on a sunny day in February 2014, along with two other divers, Jose and Carlos. Everyone checked their equipment, which included rebreathers, scooters, and multiple tanks of gas. They also had a guideline that they would use to mark their path and find their way back. They planned to dive for about 4 hours, with a maximum depth of 120 meters. When they were sure all was good to go, they entered the water and followed the guideline into the dark and narrow passages of the cave. As they proceeded, they encountered several sumps where the cave was completely filled with water and had to squeeze through them. They also had to navigate around stalactites, stalagmites, and other rock formations that could damage their equipment or injure them. Eventually, they reached a point where the guideline ended, and they had to decide whether to continue or turn back. Ricard and Denisio were eager to explore further, while Jose and Carlos were more cautious and wanted to stick to the plan. The decision was for them to split up, with Ricard and Denisio going ahead and Jose and Carlos waiting for them at the end of the guideline. Ricard and Denisio proceeded deeper into the cave. They soon found themselves in a large chamber where they saw a faint glimmer of light coming from the ceiling. They were thrilled, thinking that they had found the crack that led to the surface, so they decided to investigate further, hoping to see the sun and the sky. But as they got closer, they realized that it was not what they expected. It was not a crack, but a thin layer of air trapped between the water and the rock. They had reached a dead end with no way out. They were trapped in the innermost part of the cave with no guideline, no communication, and no hope. The air was thin with little oxygen to breathe. It was better than drowning, but the two friends knew they were living on borrowed time. Unfortunately, Ricard could not hold on, and he tragically succumbs to the depths of the water, leaving Denisio alone and trembling in the cold. As Denisio grapples with the realization that he may also die soon, little did he know that a rescue operation is underway, led by Corporal Irie and a team of professional divers. Despite the challenges posed by the silty waters and the risk to the rescuers' lives, the search persists. Eventually, Ricard's lifeless body is found, followed by the astonishing discovery that Denisio is still clinging to life. Through heroic efforts, including sedation and a risky return dive, Denisio is finally brought to safety, becoming the first person in Spain to survive such an ordeal. Number 4. The Gollum Cave Tragedy. Indeed, one of the most popular cave diving disasters of all time. But this time, it is a cave dive with absolutely no equipment and by complete amateurs. To make it worse, it happened in the worst possible circumstance. So, what happened? This horrific incident occurred on August 18, 2005 in Provo, Utah, USA. 4 young people drowned in a narrow, water-filled passage inside an underground cave known as Gollum's Cave, or the Cave of Death. The victims were Scott McDonald, 28, Blake Donner, 24, Jennifer Gilbraith, 21, and Ariel Singer, 18. They were part of a group of 5 friends who decided to explore the cave, which was notorious for its dangerous and claustrophobic conditions. The cave had a secret inner chamber that could only be accessed by swimming through a 10-foot-long tunnel that was barely wide enough for a person to fit. The group entered the cave around 8:30 p.m. and reached the tunnel around 9:15 p.m. One of them decided it was not such a good idea anymore and decided to stay at the entrance. He would be the lucky one. The rest proceeded into the tunnel, diving into the water. They took turns to swim through the tunnel using a rope to guide them. Jennifer Galbraith led the way since she was the one who knew so much about this cave. The rest simply followed her lead. The four friends successfully made their way into the inner chamber, spent some time there, then headed back. Again, Jennifer took the lead, but they never made it out alive. Their friend, who was waiting outside, soon became worried as time passed and his friends were still not out. He knew something was wrong, so he rushed to find help. Everyone hoped they were still alive in the inner chamber. Fresh air was even pumped into the tunnel so they could buy the trapped friends some time. Little did they know that the four friends were long dead. As divers made their way into the tunnel, the body of Jennifer was discovered to be blocking the way. She was brought out. Then the bodies of the other three were also discovered in the tunnel. The rescuers had to use special equipment and techniques to retrieve the bodies, which took several hours. The video camera was also recovered, which showed the last moments of the victims. The tragedy shocked and saddened the local community, as well as the caving community. The cave was permanently closed and sealed by the authorities, who also warned people to stay away from other dangerous caves in the area. Number 3. The Cueva del Agua Tragedy. This was a cave diving accident that occurred on August 17, 1996 in the Cueva del Agua cave, which simply means water cave in English. This cave is located at Sorbas, Almeria, Spain. The incident involved two Spanish cave divers, Jose Antonio Martinez and Jose Luis Garcia, who lost their lives after becoming trapped in a siphon or a flooded passage at a depth of about 200 feet. They were part of a group of 6 divers who were exploring the cave, which is one of the longest and most complex underwater cave systems in Europe. These two divers were not just professional colleagues, they were also lifelong friends. This made what happened to them more chilling. The accident happened when the two divers, who were the most experienced and equipped of the group, decided to go further into the siphon than the others, who waited for them at a dry chamber or an air-filled space near the entrance. The two divers carried rebreathers and scooters, which are propulsion devices to extend their range and speed. However, they encountered a restriction that forced them to remove their equipment and push it through. In the process, they lost their guide line, which is a safety line that connects divers to the exit, and became disoriented in the murky water. The other 4 divers, who were worried about their delay, decided to go back to the surface and alert the authorities. A rescue operation was launched, involving more than 100 divers from different countries and organizations, as well as helicopters and boats. The rescue efforts lasted for 10 days, but were hampered by the difficult access, the low visibility, the strong currents, and the high risk of the operation. The bodies of the 2 divers were eventually located and recovered on August 27, about 1.5 kilometers from the entrance of the siphon. At number 2 is the Killer Gloworm Cave Tragedy. This story happened in May 2023, and it's a real nail-biter. New Zealand has some of the most dangerous and deepest underwater caves in the world, such as the Pierce Resurgence and the Poor Knights Islands. These caves are home to some new-to-science species, such as a transparent amphipod, a worm, and a small snail. They also offer stunning views of the underwater landscape, such as the world's largest sea cave. However, exploring these caves requires extreme caution and professional skills, as they pose many risks, such as low visibility, strong currents, decompression sickness, and equipment failure. Only a few divers have managed to reach the depths of these caves, such as Richard Harris, who dived to 245 meters in the Pierce Resurgence. Let's start with the Ebby Caves. They're pretty famous for hiking and fun. There are 3 main caves that make up this cave network, which are Organ, Middle, and Ivy. They're not too far from Whangarei, which is just a 10-minute drive away. But there's a sign outside that says you need a plan in case of emergencies. That's because things can go wrong, as we're about to find out. Now imagine you're in the heart of New Zealand, surrounded by these cool caves. They're made of limestone and have these neat streams running through them. Exploring them sounds like a blast, right? Well, it is, but it's also risky. You've got to be careful, especially if it's rainy. Flash floods can happen, and that's no joke. So Here's this group of adventurers. They're all excited to explore the Abbey Caves. But here's the thing, the weather forecast isn't looking great. Heavy rain is on the way. Now most people would probably cancel the trip, but not these guys. They decide to go anyway, despite the warning signs, a mistake every caver avoids. As they venture deeper into the caves, things start to get scary. The water level starts rising fast, and they realize they're in trouble. They're trapped with no way out. It's like something out of a movie. Luckily, they've got a teacher with them who's a real hero. He does everything he can to keep everyone safe, but it's tough. The water keeps coming, and they're running out of time. Meanwhile, outside the caves, the community is freaking out. Parents are worried sick about their kids, and everyone's trying to help. It's chaos. In the end, they manage to rescue most of the students, but one doesn't make it. There was a lot of media attention to this incident. Everyone had hoped for a perfect happy ending, but nature can be cruel. Though everyone was happy most of the children made it, it was still sad that one was lost. It's a heartbreaking reminder that nature can be dangerous, and we need to be careful, especially when we are out exploring. Finally, we get to the #1 disaster on our list, the Mount Gambier cave diving accident. Amidst the rugged beauty of Mount Gambier in South Australia lay a mysterious sinkhole known as the Shaft. The cave was a spectacle to behold, but it was extremely dangerous too. In the spring of 1973, a group of 9 adventurous souls, drawn temptations of the adventures the cave presents, decided to take a dive into this sinkhole. Among them were siblings Stephen and Christine M. Millett, along with their companions Gordon G. Roberts and John H. Buckerman. These divers were seasoned veterans, well versed in the art of underwater exploration. Equipped with open-circuit scuba gear, they embarked on their journey into the unknown, their hearts filled with anticipation and excitement. As they descended into the abyss, following the guiding thread of a carefully laid guideline, everything seemed to be going according to plan. They reached a depth of 100 feet without incident, marveling at the otherworldly beauty that surrounded them. But they were about to make a grave mistake that will end tragically. It was difficult to keep track of each other in a cave this big. Soon, they were separated and unable to find each other. Undeterred, Stephen, Christine, Gordon, and John pressed on, their curiosity driving them deeper into the twists and turns of the cave. But in their eagerness to explore, they ventured beyond the boundaries of their planned route, casting aside the safety of the guideline that had guided them this far. As they began their ascent back to the surface, the 4 divers soon realized their mistake. Lost in the maze-like tunnels of the cave, they frantically searched for a way out, their air supply dwindling with each passing moment. In the end, they succumbed to the icy embrace of the deep, their bodies joining the silent ranks of those who had died in its depths before them. In the end, 4 lives were lost. This makes the 1973 incident at Mount Gambier one of the worst underwater cave disasters of all time. While these stories are sad, there are lessons we can all learn from them. If you surely want to check out other videos on the channel, make sure you smash that subscribe button to stay in the loop.